Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. You know, people know about North Korea helping Russia with drones and other technology, but they've been part of the rogue axis. They've been part of the evil axis, and they've been helping Iran, Hezbollah with nuclear weapons, with ballistic missiles. People don't really realize that Iran wouldn't have the capability that it has now in its war against Israel. It had not been for North Korea. Our guest is Dr. Bruce E. Bechtol, Jr., PhD, Professor of Political Science, Department of Security Studies at Angelo State University. His new book is called Rogue Allies, the Strategic Partnership Between Iran and North Korea. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Zev. I hear great things about you. I'm glad to be on your show.
I'm glad to have you because you have such important information that we and everybody should know about. Iran wouldn't be where it is today, military-wise, nuclear-wise, if not for North Korea. What's going on?
Well, you know, I think that what's happened the past 4 days really show, and actually what happened last year. Let's start with last year. There was 2 attacks, one in April, one in October by the Iranians against North Korea. In fact, the one in October, that was more ballistic missiles than any nation state has ever fired at a nation state ever before. The largest ballistic missile attack against another state ever used. Now, Israel has great ballistic missile defense, and they shot most of those missiles down. Of course, Israel's defending 10 million people. The United States has to defend 360 million people. But nevertheless, the Israelis did a great job, and we helped them out, too, with our Aegis-equipped ships out there, et cetera. They fired 3, basically, just like they did this last time on the past 4 days. They basically fired 3 types of missiles. 2 of them were liquid fuel. 1 was solid fuel. The solid fuel they probably got from either the Russians or the Chinese. But most of those missiles they fired were essentially nothing more than souped-up nodons, the Gadir and the Emad. And not only did they buy, those came from the Shahab 3, which is an exact copy of the Nodon. The North Koreans built a factory for the Nodon, calling it the Shahab 3 for the Iranians.
And they built it in Iran.
Sir?
They built it in Iran, this factory.
They built it in Iran for the Iranians, but it couldn't operate without North Korean parts and North Korean engineers and technicians. So the proliferation continued. It had to, because the Iranians simply didn't have the parts. After those missiles seemed to work very well, the Shahab 3, the Iranians then contracted with the North Koreans to quote-unquote upgrade. Now, what does upgrade mean? Upgrade means they gave one of those missiles a 200-kilometer increase in its striking length and one a 400-kilometer in strength. Why was that? That was so those missiles would have the range to hit Israel. And those missiles were the Emad and the Gadir, which did hit Israel, but they're only about 10% effective is what I'm seeing so far, and that's what I'm hearing in unclassified reports as well. So as it relates directly to Iran and Israel, those missiles are the biggest thing that we've seen so far, and the Iranians have hundreds of them left. The North Koreans either sold them directly or built a bunch of them for the Iranians. So the Israeli Air Force is going to have a lot of missiles they got to take out.
How much money did Iran spend with North Korea? Do you have any idea?
I do. According to Larry Nish of Congressional Research Service, which he wrote right smack dab in the middle of the Syrian civil war, starting in the mid 80s, actually, and all the way through the Syrian civil war, the North Koreans were making anywhere from $1.5 to $3 billion a year annually off of arms sales to Iran. Now, understand those arms sales also included stuff they bought from North Korea for the Houthis, for Hezbollah, and for Hamas. But 1.5 to 3 billion a year
wow,
is a lot considering North Korea's GDP is about 20 billion a year.
That's quite a hefty sum that they're spending since the 1980s. So you can do the math. It's a fortune of money. Now, in addition to helping with the ballistic missiles, didn't they help them with the underground tunnels and other nuclear type weapons?
Wow, you're a really well-read guy. They absolutely did.
They're experts in tunnels, right?
Yeah, I like talking to people that are well informed. It makes it so much easier. But yes, they did facilities that are actually being bombed by the Israelis right now, deep underground, as we've all been told 100 times on all of the news outlets. The North Koreans, for your listenership, they build better underground facilities than anybody else in the world, for themselves under the DMZ in Korea, for the Iranians, even for Polisario back in Morocco 50 years ago. They've been very good at it for
a very long
time.
Too? Did they help Hamas with their tunnels?
They absolutely did. Now, there's a big smoking gun about helping out Hezbollah, because Hezbollah actually signed a contract with Korea Mining Development Company, which is a front company for the Reconnaissance General Bureau. We have no smoking gun from the Hamas tunnels, but Israeli experts who have gone down inside those tunnels tell us that they look much like what the now destroyed Hezbollah tunnels look like. And one professor from a university in Israel, she even said they reminded her of the tunnels under the DMZ in Korea. So very interesting stuff. And they're knee deep in that. They also sold Hezbollah and Hamas F-7 rocket-propelled grenades, anti-tank guided missile systems, Type 58 rifles, which is the North Korean version of the AK-47, Type 73 machine guns, which is a North Korean version of the SKS. I could go on, and I probably would, but you'll beat me over the head if I do. So the bottom line is North Korea is knee-deep in everything that's been going on in the Middle East since October 7th.
And it's been under the radar screen because people don't realize it. They talk about North Korean troops helping Russia in the Ukraine war, but this is far more sophisticated, where they provided the technology. Also, they must have had their experts in Iran too. Are they still in Iran? As far as you can tell?
As far as I know, yes, sir, they are. Because as far as I know, they have hundreds of people still working with the Iranians at their missile sites. They have hundreds of people that are working with the Iranians for conventional weapons, and with the Houthis too, by the way. They just left Syria a few months ago, so they're still there. As far as I know, I don't think, typically North Korea does not evacuate its people when a war breaks out. Typically they send more people over there, as you can imagine. And speaking of combat troops in Russia, during the Syrian civil war, the North Koreans had 2 battalions of special forces in Syria fighting for Assad's forces right near Aleppo, and they were called Chalma 1 and Chalma 7.
Unbelievable. Why has it not gotten the attention in the media and in the West that it should have? This is very dangerous because they are providing the know-how to these terrorist rogue states.
Well, that's well said, and that's a question I've asked myself a lot. But our country has always had a higher priority. I mean, there was talks in 2018, for example, and other things going on. But the bottom line is they have stopped. And they have been a big enabler, a force multiplier for, Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. And they've made a lot of money off of it. So, if we want to see less violence, less instability, we have to cut off the North Korean proliferation stream. And our foreign policy, as yet, has stated that it wanted to cut that off, and we've had sanctions in place. We just haven't been very focused on it. And I think it's time that we started focusing on it, because this is a bad problem.
Now, you pointed out they're very good in creating ballistic missiles. They created a factory in Iran to help Iran with more sophisticated ballistic missiles that have longer capabilities. What about nuclear fuel centrifuges? Are they involved somehow in that as well?
Well, I saw reports. This is I'm an old man. I'm 65 years old.
That's young.
I'd like to think so. But I saw reports back around 2003, 2004, just to get your audience up to speed on that. And right at the end of 2002, the United States put a lot of pressure on Pakistan to stop its nuclear bazaar, its nuclear weaponization bazaar. They were selling nuclear weapons centrifuge technology to not just North Korea, but also Iran and Libya. And we got Libya, the Brits actually got Libya to give us all that they had. And so when they did, we realized that they were selling that, or had been sold, the Iranians and the North Koreans, a 500 kilogram warhead for highly enriched uranium nuclear missile. And this warhead would go in the Nodong, which, as you know, the Iranians sold to the North Koreans sold to the Iranians. And there were reports at the time from the press, specifically the Los Angeles Times, that stated the Iranians were getting help on making that warhead combat capable from the North Koreans. The North Koreans have that capability right now, and they had it back then. Those reports were never confirmed, and I've never seen anything on that in over 20 years. So that's what we know so far about their nuclear program, other than the fact that North Korea has dug a lot of underground facilities for them to operate their highly enriched uranium program, just as they have for their ballistic missiles.
Our guest is Dr. Bruce E. Bechtol, Jr., PhD, Professor of Political Science, Department of Security Studies, Angelo State University. His new book is called Rogue Allies, the Strategic Partnership Between Iran and North Korea. Now, part of what North Korea has been doing is also fortifying one of the best Iranian nuclear sites, which is hard to penetrate, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And which one is that?
Natanz is the main one that they worked at. Now, we have a smoking gun for that because that was earlier. That was way back in 2004, 2005. The site everybody's talking about, Fordo, I guess is how everybody's pronouncing it. I'm a Korean specialist, so give me those Korean names. Kim, Pak, Che, E, Kang. These Iranian names are hard for me, buddy. But
the Korean names are much easier.
I know. But the site at Fordo, I have seen no smoking gun on that, but I would just ask the question, if they did it at Natanz, why would they not do it at Fordo? It's the same type of technology. So I would not be surprised if after that site gets destroyed, and I think you and I both know that that's very likely to happen, that if we are able to see or we're able to get any access to battle damage assessment, we will find that it has North Korean footprints all over it.
Does that also mean that China is behind? Because China, of course, is an enabler of North Korea. Do we have Chinese fingerprints too?
It might. I have something interesting to share with you on commercial websites today. I saw that the Chinese flew in 2 military aircraft yesterday, carrying military gear that landed at Iranian airfields. Can you believe that? That happened yesterday. And I guess my comment on that would be, man, if I was a Chinese pilot, the last place I'd want to be flying a cargo plane into is an airfield in Iran right now, right?
So what are they doing? Do we know what they're bringing in?
No idea. All that the reports were able to ascertain was that they were military cargo jets, and that so they were obviously carrying some type of sensitive military material. And it must have been important if they were willing to fly right in the middle of a combat zone and an airfield in Iran. And Iran, as you know right now, basically the whole country is a combat zone. And Israel's Air Force owns the skies. So, North Korea and China, the PRC, have operated together at times. North Korea was involved in China's 25-year plan in 2020 with Iran, and they worked together to sell things that were augmenting each other. There have also been times when they worked very separately from each other. But I think this is a time, I would assess this is a time they're working together. So I think your question is very well placed. I think we're going to see more as time goes by about the role that China has also played in this.
They've also ordered their citizens to be evacuated from Israel too, or to leave Israel.
Very true. And as you know, I'm Jewish, so are you. Where are we going to go for Chinese food in Tel Aviv if all the Chinese guys are gone? Come on, man.
We'll find a good kosher Chinese restaurant.
There you go.
It'll be run by a lawyer. It'll be called So Sue Me, but it'll be a good restaurant.
Exactly.
And now, getting back to the situation, it's not only that North Korea has been helpful to Iran, and they've built these plants and missiles and helped with other war technology. Hezbollah has been a beneficiary of North Korea too. They signed a big contract. Well, how much money did Hezbollah sign, and what did North Korea do for Hezbollah?
That's a really good question. In fact, that's the question. Not as much as Iran, and some of it was from Iran, as was aid that went to Syria. Proliferation, I should say, it went to Syria. But I think it's important for your listeners to understand Hezbollah went from what was largely simply a terrorist force in the 1980s and 90s to, by the time the mid-2000s had got there, they really became the equivalent of a well-trained, effective army of a nation state. And that just got better after 2006. After the war in 2006, when Israel's defense forces really were less effective against them than they thought they would be, and you know why that was? Because of those tunnels, the first set of tunnels that the North Koreans built for them. What we're seeing now is the second set. Both sets are destroyed now. But after that war in 2006, Hezbollah sent about 100 guys, top guys, many of them dead now, thanks to the IDF. They sent those guys to North Korea for training for 6 months. So it's not just the equipment, which is, multiple rocket launchers and low-level artillery and machine guns and rifles, etc. It's also the training, which is very important. Now, that's probably about 70% coming from Iran. I count that in the 1.5 to 3 billion figure. About 30 to 40% of that comes from Hezbollah itself, because, as you well know, like the North Koreans and like the Iranians, they run a lot of illicit networks to make money, including and especially in places like Venezuela. And you know why they do that, of course, because Venezuela has a very large expat Lebanese population, many of them Shia Muslims, who are willing to send money back to those guys to help them. So there's that. But Hezbollah would not be able to be as effective as they are, not nearly, or as they have been until very recently, without the support that they've gotten from Iran.
And Iran, of course, the North Korea connection. I'm curious, in the Russia-Ukraine war, quite a few North Korean soldiers have been casualties. In the fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Iran, do we have any idea if any North Koreans were casualties as part of these two situations?
There have been casualties, but only at facilities where the North Koreans were assisting either Iranians or Hezbollah in weapons. They were not on the ground with Hamas in Gaza. As far as I can tell, there's no evidence to support that. They've sold a lot of stuff directly to Hamas. They've sold stuff to Iran that went to Hamas, both of those things. But the North Koreans that have been killed thus far were guys who were at facilities that the Israelis took out, that they were assisting those guys with either rocket systems or missile systems, etc. And you brought up Russia. As far as I can tell, they sent about 15,000 guys over there now. About 500 to 600 of them have been killed. They've had about 2,000 wounded. That sounds like a lot. It's not. In that war, which is somewhat like the Somme in World War I, just a horrible war, the Ukrainians and the Russians are taking horrible casualties. So those heavy casualties were very likely something that Kim Jong-un expected when he sent those troops over there. So
it would make sense to really go after North Korea, because they are a pipeline, not just, in the Ukraine situation, Ukraine war, but also in the Middle East, and with helping Iran and helping Hezbollah and to a lesser degree Hamas. They are a supporter and enabler of terrorism. I'm just surprised that this has not been more public, and why the world community has not gone heavier after North Korea.
Well, they should. As you can imagine, I've been getting a lot of phone calls after some recent pieces I wrote. But I wrote a book in 2018 entitled North Korean Military Proliferation to the Middle East and Africa. And it got a lot of attention for about 6 months, and then everybody forgot about North Korea again. What did they think? They stopped? And why would they? Frankly, when it comes to North Korea, anything about North Korea, not just their proliferation, people tend, and when I say people, I mean policymakers on both sides of the aisle, tend to deprioritize North Korea until it's too late to not to. You see what I'm saying? Because North Korea will always do something and will say, oh gosh, what do we do now? That's been going on really since the Cold War stopped in the 1990s, the early 1990s, and the North Koreans started up that nuclear power plant at Yongbyon. And we had to do the agreed framework in 1994. Since then, we've had one crisis after another. This military proliferation that we're seeing is a crisis. They're supplying two of the most unstable and violent places on earth right now in the Middle East and Ukraine. And it's something that we should address. We can do it non-kinetically, and I'm hoping that our government does just that.
Now we have to put up the pressure. This is just an outrage. And you know that they're going to continue to help Iran and help these rogue states, and it's a danger to the whole world. Now, you mentioned earlier that they built a facility to make ballistic missiles in Iran itself. As far as we know, has that been taken out?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. The Israelis have not been specific as to what facilities they said they took out. I saw today on the news that they said they had taken out 40% of Iran's launchers and their systems. I heard both those words used. That would hopefully mean that they've taken out the factories that manufacture those as well. Remember, they have factories that manufacture no-dong upgrades, factories that manufacture the SSN-6, which they call the Musadon upgrades, factories that manufacture those Scud-C upgrades. They could be, and hopefully should be, taking out all of those. Whether those specific facilities have been taken out or not yet, I don't know. I would really anticipate, as I'm sure you would, that that is on their target list.
Now, I'm sure Israeli intelligence knows about the North Korean connection, whether it was in Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. I'm just surprised they haven't made more out of it or of it.
Well, that's very true. And frankly, you know, I've been to Israel 3 times. Great place to go. And frankly, my first time there, I was surprised at how focused the Israeli scholars that do what I do, you know, they study military and national security issues, were focused on Iran, but not on North Korea. I mean, Iran is in many ways only as good as the weapons and training on those weapons that they get from North Korea. So if you're not looking at the pipeline that supplies your combat capabilities, you're not really going to cut it off. I mean, you can kill all the Iranian personnel you want. They'll just be replaced by others. We know that. So this is something that I preached a lot when I was over there. And I went back in 2019 and 2022, said the same thing. There are scholars in Israel who are speaking up, especially about Iranian missiles. One of them is named Tal Inbar, who's a good friend of mine. And Tal has a great expression regarding North Korean missiles. He says, if you see it in North Korea today, you see it in Iran tomorrow.
And they're busy coming up with new developments. They're very good in coming up with new weaponry. I'm not sure where they get this know-how, but they seem to be excellent in fabricating and making these weapons of mass destruction.
They do. Well, I agree. When you look at the North Koreans, you just have to understand they're very poor and communist. South Koreans, right? They're the same people. Koreans are really smart people with a lot of ingenuity. And so, you know, we've seen South Korea, which is now the country with the world's 9th largest GDP. They make super tankers, they make Hyundais, they make Kias. Well, North Korea is the same way, except they make submachine guns and ballistic missiles. And I mean, this is what happened when you have one country with an autocratic dictator and the other country is a real democracy. So to me, it's not surprising that a country as poor as North Korea can still be an advanced.
Why is it such a poor country? Just the weaponry, just the payments they're getting from Iran alone, which is about $3 billion a year since 1983. That's a tremendous sum of money, and I'm sure they've been selling it to Russia and other countries as well. So why are they considered a poor country? They're really sitting on a ton of moolah.
They are, as far as military weaponry goes. And just to add to that figure that you mentioned, according to the Korean Institute for Defense Analysis, which is one of probably the best national security think tank in South Korea, since late 2022, the North Koreans have made $20 billion from proliferation to Russian. Think about that. North Korea makes about $26 billion a year as its GDP. It's stated GDP.
Where's the money?
The money is going to the elite, that 5,000 to 50,000 guys that keep the Kim family in power, and it's going to maintain that huge military, 1.3 million men in a country of 25 million people. Can you imagine that? They got technically, on paper, they have a bigger military than the United States. They got 25 million people. They got the population of Texas. So this is the big tragedy. This is the big human rights tragedy as well, that instead of using that money that he's gotten from all that proliferation, to make his people's life better, the Kim family, Kim Jong-un this time, but his father before him, his grandfather, they've done nothing but make and maintain North Korea as an armed camp, essentially.
Now, Iran has also flushed with money, and that also helped contribute to their buildup especially during the Obama years with the treaty that took place, where they were able to get tons of money. When the sanctions were in place, they still spend money, but it's much tougher. One way to get rid of this whole situation, you have to follow the money trail and cut off the money.
You are a genius, sir. It's in my book. You haven't even read my book yet, and you know this.
You have to be a ballistics scientist to know that. But the fact is, though, they follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money is the key, because I know, the United States is not going to drop bombs on North Korea, okay? We're not going to do that. For one thing, the South Koreans don't want to do it. Israelis are very different than South Koreans. Well, duh. But they don't want us to do that, so we won't. So what does that mean? That we have to use non-kinetic means to take out these illicit financial networks that support all this violence and instability around the world, including in places like Africa, too. It's been going on since the end of the Cold War, and it went on during the Cold War as a satellite of the USSR. How do we do that? We go after their illicit financial networks, which have now largely transformed, if you will, from networks that, are spider webs, vast spider webs of front companies, etc., and, working with the triads in China and, drug gangs in Venezuela and Mexico and crooked businessmen in Singapore. They've kind of gotten past that. They're moving away from that to cyber. And cyber is much, much harder for international law enforcement to go after. I mean, if you look at the cyber we have in the United States and what's going on with that Bitcoin, et cetera, the U.S. government can't even really get our arms around our own Bitcoin guys. How in the world are we going to do that to the North Koreans? And furthermore, how are we going to get our allies to do it? They're all in the same boat we are. So this has become an even bigger challenge than it ever was. I'm not saying we shouldn't go after it, Treasury especially, but it's going to be a big challenge.
It's a big challenge. Now, there's also a connection between Pakistan and North Korea regarding nuclear weapons. And Pakistan also is a nuclear power. And that's also something which is out there. I think Pakistan wanted to help Iran, but they were dissuaded from what I've read recently. But they're also a dangerous country and also have this North Korean connection.
That's true. To take you back to how that came into existence, in 1993, when North Korea actually finished the Nodong, they did an actual test launch. It was a big deal for Iranian and Pakistani officials off the east coast of North Korea. The Pakistani officials said it looked like a flying garbage can. So that was actually the first time North Korea launched a missile over Japan. The Nodong literally flew over the Japanese archipelago and landed safely on the other side, for lack of a better term. The Pakistanis and the Iranians both placed orders for that nodong at the same time. Well, the Iranians had plenty of cash. They still do. And they had oil if they didn't have cash. What did the Pakistanis have? Well, not much. So that evolved into North Korea's deal with Pakistan, largely being nukes for missiles. So the Pakistanis traded the centrifuge technology and centrifuges and sent hundreds of scientists and engineers to North Korea to help them work up an HEU program, highly enriched uranium. And the North Koreans sent nodongs to Pakistan. And then the North Koreans and the Pakistanis collaborated to figure out how to put a nuclear device, a 500 kilogram HEU warhead, on a nodong so they could hit Delhi with it. That's the Pakistanis. At the same time, the Pakistanis were selling, this is the AQ Khan network, were selling the same technology, but not as much and not as fast to the Iranians, who were using money and oil to pay for that. The United States cut that off. They basically, the United States under the Bush administration threatened to cut off all aid to Pakistan if they didn't cut off the AQ Khan network, which happened in late 2002. And that's when North Korea and Iran got really close.
Terrible, terrible situation. I'm curious. North Korea has sophisticated tunnels that they have going into South Korea. They have 1.2 million military. They have all these weapons, dangerous weapons that can do tremendous damage. Is there a point, and we always talk about China invading Taiwan, is there a possibility, or is that something on the radar screen for the North Korean leadership that they'd like to take over South Korea?
Well, that is, I guess we'd call that an ancillary goal. The number one goal of the Kim family regime, or the KFR, as my good friend Dave Maxwell calls it, is regime survival, which is a challenge, right? They're a poor country. They don't have any real industry except for that military-industrial complex you and I have talked about. They cannot raise enough food to feed themselves. A lot of problems. But maintaining the regime is pry one. Pry two is conquering or dominating the Korean Peninsula. That is not a joke. They tell us that all the time. They're not trying to hide it. That is, they want to, quote unquote, free the South Koreans. So that's a big priority. Are they at that capability? No. And as long as there's American troops in South Korea, it's never going to happen. And I think most of the American population, certainly guys like you and me, we understand that and we support that. South Korea is probably our most important ally in East Asia, just as Israel is our most important ally in the Middle East. So very important stuff.
Absolutely. And what you're saying is dangerous, what the Iranian connection with North Korea, very, very dangerous. And of course, they hold no brief for Israel. You know, you don't hear much of them talking about Israel, but behind the scenes, which is even more dangerous, is what they're providing the know-how. And they know that Iran is going to be using against Israel and against the United States is part of what their whole plan is. They want to sow division in the world. Same way China is the same way. They like to see conflict in the West, in the United States, and in Israel. There's certainly no friends of the West, no friends of Israel. And certainly this is good to expose. Thank you for exposing with the North Korean connection. We just got to make sure that something's done about it.
Well, I'm telling you, buddy, we're going to bring the Chinese to their knees with Iowa corn. We stop selling them Iowa corn, they're done. My daughter graduated from the University of Iowa, by the way.
Okay, congratulations, Mazel Tov. Anyway, Dr. Bruce Bechtol Jr. has been our guest. His new book is called Rogue Allies, a strategic partnership between Iran and North Korea. Must read. What's your next book going to be about?
Well, I have a good friend, one of my best friends, who is an Armenian from the former USSR, now a professor and an American citizen. And we're thinking about writing a book together about the North Korea-Russian connection. So I may be talking with you about 4 years from now about that.
I was thinking that there definitely is a Russia-North Korea connection. It's only gotten worse in the Ukrainian war. It's not just providing troops. There's probably technology. In fact, there is technology, drone technology and others that they supplied to Iran, and Iran supplies it to Russia. So there is that whole circle of there's whole axis of evil that are working together in one way or another. Dr. Bechtol?
You're absolutely right, sir. And thanks for having me on and allowing me to explain some of this stuff.
Look forward to having you back, and thank you for your important work that you're doing for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, talklinenetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the talklinenetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.